Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Norwood, thank you so much for making time and helping us understand and appreciate this important month. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to pause and understand, exactly where we've come from and the tremendous contributions in so many ways that you're going to tell us about. And thank you for being here. Thank you for contributing to our school. Dr. Gameda is going to give the full introduction. I'm so impressed with all you've done in so many ways in advocacy, and we're just so pleased to have you join us this morning. And thank you from the entire school, both students, faculty, and staff.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Boskamp, and thank you. It's very exciting to have Dr. Norwood today as we celebrate and recognize the continued presence and of the Lenni Lenape in particular in the space where we live and share the bounty today. And in particular, in our educational mission, to think about the continued gaps in health outcomes that many of our Indigenous people have today, and the contributions that we commit to make in all our educational mission. So thank you for being here, and we are excited about learning about the Lenape, and in particular, the healthcare context of this peoples in our neighborhoods and in our state in particular. Reverend Dr. Norwood is a member of the Nanticoke-Lenni Lenape tribal nation, one of the New Jersey 3 state-recognized tribes. He has dedicated his life to honoring and preserving Native American heritage while serving as a pastor, educator, and advocate of his community. In particular, I want everyone to note about a publication that he has, which is called "We Are Still Here." It's available on site, so please look at it. It's an amazing publication. Between 2004 and 2019, he served the Nanticoke-Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation as an elected tribal councilman, the first principal justice of the Tribal Supreme Court, and ministered to the Tribal Christian Prayer Circle Fellowship Ministry. Dr. Norwood also served as the Nanticoke-Lenni Lenape delegate to the National Congress of American Indian and General Secretary of the Alliance of Colonial Era Tribes, helping Native communities protect their heritage and voices. He has served for over 30 years as the senior pastor of Ujima Village Christian Church in Ewing, New Jersey. He's the founder and director of the Christian Mission School of Theology and First Light Mission, a Christian tribal outreach initiative. He holds a doctorate in missiology and doctor of ministry in pastoral care and counseling. And as I mentioned, he's the author of a wonderful publication, which is called "We Are Still Here," which shares the history and resilience of the Lenni Lenape people in our area. Thank you again for being here with us, and we're very excited to learn from you this morning. Dr. Norwood.
Thank you so very much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Dean Boskamp, also for the welcome. Also, in addition to Dr. McBeam's wonderful, warm introduction, I'd also like to thank Ariel Dublin and Christian Thame, who I met earlier, and have been kind of making sure that everything's coordinated for the event. It's an honor to be able to speak with you today, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see.
We can see it's just it's not in presentation mode. Just
it's not in presentation mode, is it?
Yeah, it's perfect now. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
Wonderful. So today I'd just like to give a little bit of history about the tribes in New Jersey, with a particular focus on my own tribe. With obviously I'm far more familiar with my own people. But one thing I always ask, does anybody know where Sheyichbi is? And most people in New Jersey don't. And that is actually the indigenous name for the area that we call New Jersey today is Sheyichbi. The traditional name refers to the fact that it is by the water's edge. The entire region is part of what we call Lenape-Hoking, or the land of the Lenape. But New Jersey itself, the indigenous traditional name is Sheyichbi. One of the questions that often comes up is, uh, how do we refer to Native people? Are we community, tribe, nation, or band? Are American Indians called American Indian, Native Americans, Indigenous, or First Nations people, prehistoric or pre-contact? Which term is preferred? And the fact of the matter is that each community has its own tradition as to whether they call themselves a band, a nation, a tribe, or a community. As a matter of fact, out west, some refer to themselves as pueblos. And it's important to understand that essentially we are talking about the same kind of thing. It's a self-governing community or entity, but the name may designate something about that community's history. In regard to how Native Americans would prefer to be referred to, the best thing is to find out what tribe they're a part of and refer to them in accordance with their tribal identity. So I would be a Nanticoke Lenape man. However, typically saying Indigenous or Native or First Nations is fine. We also continue to use American Indian as distinct from Indian American, because that is actually how our treaties are written and how the laws have traditionally been written that refer to us here in the United States. And we have a long history of when things get changed on documents, we wind up getting the short end of the stick. So we're very careful about that. In regard to whether to refer to the time prior to the arrival of Europeans on the continent as prehistoric or pre-contact, we prefer pre-contact because prehistoric suggests that we did not have a history or some type of a record of what happened before, or that it's unimportant. We did maintain a record. It is an oral tradition. It is also preserved using various symbols and other ways of preserving the history. And that is why so many researchers can actually go back and talk about the history of tribes prior to the arrival of European colonists. We need to understand that not all indigenous cultures are the same. It's a very dangerous thing when someone says all American Indians believe. We don't all believe the same thing. We don't all view things in the same way. There are a lot of common values, but also varying practices and perspectives based upon the region that the tribe comes from, the individual tribal customs, and sometimes they may even vary within clans within a tribe. I often say if you get 12 native leaders in a room dealing with an issue, you'll get 12 different views and opinions. So just like any other part of the population with varied insights and opinions, so do Indigenous Americans. The common practices that are quite common among North American tribes, however, include the practice of smudging, which is the use of ceremonial natural medicines such as cedar sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco. In this region, other regions may use some additional items, and it's burned as a natural incense. It's used for ceremonial purification. The rising of the smoke, similar to the way that the pipe is used, the rising of the smoke represents the rising of our prayers to the Creator. The use of the pipe, which is often called commonly the peace pipe, but actually the reason it's called the peace pipe is that's what the colonial and early federal powers referred to it, because they would see us bring out these pipes when peace treaties were cut. But the actual reference to it is the prayer pipe, and it is used in communal prayer. It is shared among those that are participating in a ceremony. It is used to help cut agreements and treaties and to symbolize the peace and harmony that's being established. It's used in also offering prayers. The sweat lodge is also common, although it varies in how it is approached ritually from tribe to tribe, and even the appearance and how it is set up from region to region. But common across North America is the use of these super hyper intensive saunas, where superheated rocks are brought in and water is poured over them. And often within that ceremony, prayers are offered, songs are sung, quite common among North American tribes. Some other common practices and values, drumming is extremely important. The common drum from history actually is this little one that is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, commonly called a tom-tom by the European colonists, but it is actually a water drum. And it was a hollowed out log that was filled partially with water, and the level of the water inside the log would change the tone, often making a sound that sounded like tom tom, and hence that's how it came to be called that. That is actually the drum that is traditional in this region. The large drums that all the men are beating in the next photograph is what is called a war drum, or commonly called a powwow drum these days. And that came to us from the West, but it has become quite common for tribes all across North America to utilize that for ceremony, for dancing, for singing. Medicine bags are particularly important, and this is something that may actually be quite significant in your dealing with Native people. If you come across someone who is wearing a Native bag or a pouch, it is disrespectful to touch it. You can ask questions. If you have to remove it, it would be good to ask permission or to ask the person to remove it. And part of the reason is because it is considered personally sacred. It holds items that are significant to that individual, that are used in remembrance, in prayer, in ceremony. And so to simply grab it or try to remove it is considered an affront. And you may get a negative reaction from someone, even though you may be trying to help them. So understanding that cultural difference certainly would go a long way in building trust in a caring relationship. The eagle is considered a messenger to the heavens, commonly among many tribes in North America. Different tribes have different birds of significance, but the eagle is commonly held among most tribes. Where there is an observance of the four directions and representing the various seasons of life, the constancy of nature, and honor gifts are regularly given as tokens of respect. These are very common traditions among tribes across the continent. The perspective of the relationship with the land among tribes is that the land belongs to the creator who's given it to our people for care and for use. We're stewards over the land. The different regions were given to the different tribal nations. And North America is commonly referred to as Turtle Island. If you say Turtle Island to an indigenous person, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And the reason that I have the turtle there and the little muskrat is because for the Nanticoke and Lenape people from this region of the country, the story goes that it was the little muskrat that actually brought up earth from the bottom of the sea that the creator used to put upon the back of the great turtle, and North America spread out over it. I indicate that I'm based upon my research, I'm not so sure that our ancestors believed that this was literally true, but the truth within the moral of the story was significant. And such stories were viewed differently from the way we view it today in a more scientific age. We have relationships with other creatures. All life is considered to be sacred. All life belongs to the creator, and we're connected to the creatures and not supposed to dominate them, but live in harmony with them. So much so that even today, when many indigenous hunters who practice the traditional ways, hold some of the traditional beliefs, take an animal for food, um, there's a prayer. There are prayers that are given, thanking the creator for the animal's life, to sustain the life, their own life and the life of their family, their household, but also prayers over the animal for sacrificing the life. The understanding is that this is a significant moment and it's not taken for granted. All animals were honored and all animal parts were used, trying to waste absolutely nothing, which is why in many ceremonial rituals, also in our regalia, the dress that we wear, you may find animal parts, feathers, hooves, different animal parts are used for different implements because it's viewed as honoring the animal to waste nothing. Now, we have three state recognized communities here in New Jersey. Up in the northern region, we have the Ramapo Lenape Nation. In the central area in Burlington County, we have the Powhatan Lenape Nation, and in the south is my own tribe, the Nanticoke Lenape Tribal Nation down in Cumberland County. Each of these communities have Lenape roots, um, although they blended with other tribes. Up in the north, there's some intermarriage with some of the tribes up in New York. The Powhatan Lenape were Virginia Indians that moved up into New Jersey in the 1800s and intermarried with some of the remnant Lenape communities that were in Burlington County. And the Nanticoke Lenape actually live on the border territory between the Lenape and the Nanticoke tribe, which occupied the central region of the Delmarva Peninsula. And the marriages went back and forth to the point that we are actually a blend of both. The Lenni Lenape people originally were referred to as the ancient ones by many tribes because many tribes in the region, the Algonquian speaking tribes, descended from us and were called the League of the Lenape. It was told that the Lenape people had what were called 23 children. And uh, being referred to as one of the ancient ones is something that happens even today. On occasion, I'm called that by tribal leaders that view the Lenape people as the ancient root of their own people. The Nanticoke, our ancestors originated across the central Delmarva, but came from the Lenape in ancient times. The Lenape lived in both East and West Jersey. At that time, our state was divided into two colonies prior to becoming a single colony. And early on, prior to the arrival of William Penn and the establishment of a treaty with Penn, we actually, in southern New Jersey, which was called West Jersey, that portion of the state, had a treaty with John Fenwick and the Fenwick colony with the Quakers. This was a little after the Swedes had arrived and the Brits were coming in toward the end of the 1600s. And we had a relationship with Fenwick and Fenwick's colony. One of the old trees that sadly fell just a few years back uh, was a tree that was many hundreds of years old, over 500 years old, and it stood as a memento, as a symbol of the treaties that were cut under it going back to the 1600s. In addition, our people had a relationship with the Quaker community in southern New Jersey. One of our chiefs is actually buried at the Quaker Meeting House in Burlington, New Jersey. And his instruction to his successor back in 1681 was be fair and plain to all, both Indian and Christian, as I have been. The Europeans that came referred to themselves as Christian, whether they really were or not. And so that is how we referred to them. Chief Akanikin rests in a place of honor in the cemetery of that meeting house. A treaty you may be familiar with is called the Penn Treaty commonly today, but we would call it the Shakamaxon Treaty because it took place in an area that was the meeting place of our chiefs called Shakamaxon. Today it's referred to as Penn Treaty Park, and the park commemorates this treaty. William Penn, the British governor of Pennsylvania, met with an assembly of our chiefs and a peace treaty was cut and wampum belts were exchanged. Wampum belts are shell beaded belts where the shells are woven into patterns to commemorate and memorialize significant events. This belt continues to exist. It's in a museum in Philadelphia, and it is a living witness to the treaty that was cut, that we would live in friendship one with another and become like one people. That treaty was kept during the time of William Penn. Unfortunately, when his sons took over, it was broken, and many of our people wound up losing lands and being pushed further and further west, winding up way out in Oklahoma and up into Canada. But there were those of us that stayed. We survived the invasion with 90% of our population being decimated by disease and war within the first 100 years of contact. And early captures of our people resulted in a hostile reception of Captain John Smith for our Nanticoke ancestors down in the Delmarva Peninsula. But Smith had learned a few things from the Powhatans that he had come in contact with earlier and left gifts on the shore on the side of the river. And we understood at that point that he came in peace. And he wound up calling us the greatest traders that he had ever dealt with in trading goods. one of the things that occurred was, even though early on some of the colonial settlements survived because of the principle of hospitality, obligatory hospitality that our people had within the culture to care for those who came in our lands that showed any level of respect for our ways. Uh, Soon and very soon, as the colonists began to increase in number, the practices that were following the doctrine of discovery began to impact us. A lot of people don't know about the doctrine of discovery. It's not commonly taught in the school curricula in our state or anywhere else in the United States, but it goes back to some papal bulls going all the way back to the 13th and 15th centuries that essentially indicated that Christian monarchs could take control of the lands of those who were not Christian. And that principle was followed even by those nations that weren't part of the Roman Catholic Church, but continued in the tradition that non-Christians did not necessarily have the right to lay claim on the lands that they lived upon. The papal bulls indicated that they could capture, vanquish, and subdue individuals who were not Christian, that they could put them in perpetual slavery and take all their possessions and property. This continued to the extent that the extermination of Native Americans continued into the colonial era as late as 1763. We were among the first to be the victims of biological warfare, with the order to share smallpox infected blankets among our people and to decimate our population. Also, there was the hunting for profit. My own people in Maryland, actually, there were rewards given for our scalps, which many people believe is the origin of the name Redskin, red meaning the blood of the skin of the scalp, and that came to be associated with us. Some say it was because of our skin, but our skin tended to be more brownish red than just red. There was no distinction made between male, female, adult, or child, and anyone that was determined to be an enemy could be killed. And an enemy was any native that happened to come across an English person's land within 300 paces and didn't give a sign of surrender by dropping down any hunting implements or anything like that and giving a sign of surrender. And that person, that native could be killed, their scalp taken, and the colonists could get a reward for that. Even though our folks were very hospitable, the Lenape tended to be early on very hospitable toward the colonists that came, with very few exceptions. We had hostilities with the Dutch early on. We had some hostilities with the English among the Nanticoke on the Delmarva, but by and large, this area was not met with the level of violence and war that we see as the nation spread further and further west. In fact, there were Nanticoke and Lenape ancestors that fought with the Americans in the French and Indian War, siding with the British colonists. My own ancestors were on muster rolls. And also there are those that are members of the Sons and Daughters of the American Revolution, because so many of us also fought with the Americans on the side of the United States during the Revolutionary War. The Lenape were divided. Some that were moving further west fought with the British, and those many that stayed here were either neutral or assisted the Americans. However, the reference that was made to us in the Declaration of Independence is that we were called merciless Indian savages, with no distinction of tribes that were friendly and those that were hostile. The doctrine of discovery became a part of American Indian law with something called the Martian Trilogy. These are three critical decisions in 1823, 1831, and 1832 that impacted the sovereignty rights of indigenous nations and subjected us to the laws of the United States and denied us some of the inherent rights that we had to our lands. Even though the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776 and the Constitution adopted in 1787 and Bill of Rights in 1791, it wasn't until 1879 that American Indians were viewed as persons within the meaning of the law and had certain protections. It wasn't until 1924 that indigenous people who were living under the jurisdiction of Congress on federal lands, on reservation lands, were even viewed as citizens of the United States. And long after that, well into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even more recently, have had challenges even in maintaining voting rights in some states. It wasn't until 1978 that Congress signed a law enacting the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, allowing some of the traditional spiritual practices to be continued among our people and not be persecuted. Now, the Lenape people, many of us, along with many of the Nanticoke, were forced to migrate in the 17th century. By 1740, most of our people had left our homeland, which extended from the headwaters of the Hudson in southwestern Connecticut, southeastern New York, all of New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware, and then the Nanticoke through the central Delmarva. Most of our folks were forced to leave, pushed further west and north out into Oklahoma and up into Canada, where there are communities that still are there and are striving to thrive. Uh, and those of us that remain were pressured onto reservations and forced to adapt to Anglo-American ways of life in order to remain in the land. We became Christianized very early on. And we wound up being reclassified as free persons of color and mulatto if we became Christian, because some of the laws that affected us defined Indian as a non-Christian. So those of my ancestors that were baptized in some records prior to being Christian are called Indian, and in other records afterwards are not, simply because of baptism. Um, in addition to that, the definition of where Indians were and who was an Indian, American Indian, in the colonial records in Delaware, which is where many of my ancestors came from, uh, the definition was changed to those living far from the state. And part of the reason for trying to eradicate the official recognition of the existence of tribes, which happened in New Jersey and in Delaware by redefining the who a native was, and also indicating that they all left. Part of the motivation was to eradicate any obligations based upon treaty agreements. So if you claim that they're all gone, you don't have to honor any of the treaties anymore. And that actually became something that continued to be a battle in identifying the fact that communities were still here and that many of those promises were still in place, even though they had been ignored for generations. That became an issue that we continue to struggle with well into the 2000s in New Jersey. One of the policies that we see taking place from the 1800s all the way into the 1960s were that many Indian children were taken from their families and put in Indian boarding schools. The goal was to assimilate, force assimilation. The children were taken, they could not use their traditional names. They were given English names. They could not use their traditional language. They could be severely punished. Their dress was changed, their culture was changed, their identity was impacted. And this was often done forcibly. The little handcuffs you see were used at the Haskell Indian Institute is in Kansas. It's now Haskell Indian University. But back when it was a boarding school, many children were taken by force and brought in handcuffs and transformed. This is a point of great pain. The cemetery you see, the cemetery in Carlisle, at the Carlisle Institute in Pennsylvania, that is today the War College for the United States military, but it has a history of actually being a boarding school for Native children. According to the census, something that people don't realize is that 78% of those identifying as Native live outside of traditional American Indian and Alaskan Native areas. In other words, off reservation. So, when you are speaking with a Native person, it is unreasonable to assume that they lived on or came from reservation. For my own people, the last reservations that we had in the region, there were several in Delaware and Maryland, but they were gone by 1700, the early 1700s. And there was only one official one here in New Jersey, and that was disbanded in the early 1800s. But many of our people continued to live in what were designated as Indian fields or Indian lands, Indian towns that were unofficial, but just kind of acknowledged regionally that that's where a lot of American Indians, indigenous people continue to live. There are over 70,000 who identify as people of American Indian descent just in New Jersey. And as I said before, there are 3 state tribes with a total enrollment of over 6,000 people. The communities that are remaining in the area that have some level of recognition are indicated here on the map. There are 3 in New Jersey plus 1, the Sand Hill Indians, that are not state recognized, but they are recognized as historic by the tribes and by researchers. And then we have the 2 other Nanticoke and Lenape tribes across the bay in New Jersey. Our people are the original people of the Delaware Bay region, and we continue with our traditions to this very day. Part of the reason that we were able to stay in the area is that for over 400 years, uh, we became Christian. 400 years ago, we can trace our baptism. Some of our chiefs changed the symbol that they used in marking peace treaties and land grants. One began using a Christian cross. Another called himself Christian the Indian back in the 1600s. Uh, we wound up establishing our own churches. To this very day, they are it's still congregations that have continued from the early 1800s, and they are in each of the communities. They served for generations as the hub of tribal government, that the church government was the tribal government. That began to change in the 1900s, between the early 1900s and the 1960s, where each of the tribes began to have elections outside of the church, mostly because the demographics of the church slightly changed, where you had non-natives joining the church, and the feeling was that you did not want to lose control of your tribal government because of a demographic shift within the church. We continue to maintain our own government, our own communities, and all of these folks are Nanticoke and Lenape individuals, going all the way back, the oldest picture going all the way back to the early 1900s. Our culture is alive and well. We continue some of our ancient ways, but we're also continuing to evolve, and some of the ancient traditions are being mixed in with some modern practices. The images that you see are people wearing regalia. We do not call it costume. Costume is something that you put on to make believe that you're something you're not. Regalia is an expression of who you actually are. We try to keep our people together by honoring our elders and our children, our youth. And we believe that we have to honor those that established our legacy over the past 7 generations, and we need to always make decisions bearing the next 7 generations in mind. Something that a lot of folks in New Jersey don't realize is that prior to the establishment of the British colonies in New Jersey, in the region, the Swedes had a colony in southern New Jersey and northern Delaware, and to this very day have a relationship with our tribe in southern New Jersey. The image that you see of the gentleman shaking hand is our past chief shaking the hand of the King of Sweden. We continue to care for our people, and the tribe actually provides health and social services to the best of its ability, because so many of our folk actually trust the tribal governance more than they do the state and federal government because of the history. And the practice of looking to the tribe to address concerns is one of the ways that many health institutions have been able to interface with us to provide certain care. We had podiatric services at our tribal center, diabetes care at our tribal center, and many of our elders would come out and get care that they would not get otherwise. There's some things that we need to correct about the people that lived in this region in ancient times. Our folks were never teepee folks. When we think of teepees, actually, that's something that happened further west. We did not use dugout canoes in New Jersey and Delaware, and in this region, the eastern portion of Pennsylvania. We use dugout canoes, but not bark canoes. Often you will see us depicted with bark-covered canoes, but we would make the dugout ones, which were far more sturdy for navigating the rivers. We never worshiped the devil. We were monotheistic, always monotheistic, not savages. Our folks were not nomadic. We didn't ride horses following herds of buffalo in this region. These were the northeastern woodlands. And while in ancient time there was a northeastern buffalo, we didn't follow herds. Our folks tended to have a summer home and a winter home, like a lot of New Jerseyans are blessed to be able to have these days. And in the summer, we went to the shore, and in the winter, we were kind of in the interior part of the state in the same little villages, back and forth. We were the ones that granted occupancy rights to the Swedes, the Dutch, and the English, and were among the first to wind up on reservations, which actually began here in the East going back to the 1600s, even though when most people think of reservations, they think of what happened way out west in the 1800s. We don't receive government checks from the federal government simply because we're native. We may receive checks from our tribe if the tribe has businesses or has a treaty arrangement with the federal government where certain funds are provided, but you don't get a check just because you're indigenous. A lot of people are confused by that, but if anybody can tell me how to get a direct check just simply because of my native ancestry, somebody needs to let me know. But I've never met any native who was able to get that type of a blessing. Most don't live on reservations, as I said. We live in our houses like everybody else. Most of us live out in the community. We have jobs like everyone else. We're citizens of both our tribes and the United States and the state we live in. Most tribes don't have or even want casinos. That's a misnomer. There's this thought, oh, if you're native, your tribe has a casino. Many tribes do, most don't. And among those that do, many don't really make much money. Um, our tribe is joined with the other three Nanakokonape tribes, where we have by tribal law that we will not profit from any form of vice. And that's tied to our cultural and spiritual traditions. An American Indian tribe is distinct from an enthusiast group or cultural historical organization because it's a community that has a history that is continuous. It's historic, it's continuous, and the people are interrelated. The families have been together for centuries and have acknowledged one another as part of that community for centuries and have in some way, shape, or form had some form of self-governance. There's a uniqueness to indigenousness. The cultural heritage of other communities exists elsewhere on the planet, whereas if our culture is ever squashed, it disappears from the planet. It's only here. Other communities, their self-identification is accepted. We have to prove who we are. And in order to be eligible for certain benefits, like certain scholarships and things like that, we have to be citizens, acknowledged citizens of tribes that are recognized by the state or federal government. There are over 570 tribes that are federally recognized. There are about 60 that have state recognition, but there are 200 tribes that have no recognition but are historic. And their people have a very difficult time being able to affirm and assert their identity. While, with the exception of the descendants of American slavery, people who came here had a choice as to whether to become part of the melting pot, so to speak, that became the America. But the agenda for our people from the federal government was the cultural destruction for many years. Some people don't understand why we need to maintain our own tribal governments, why we need some form of state or federal recognition. Why can't we just celebrate our cultures like other Americans celebrate our cultures, or ignore the fact that we have any distinct culture and blend in? And the reasons are actually many, and some of them I've mentioned earlier. In order to be eligible for American Indian scholarships, you have to be enrolled in a recognized tribe. Uh, your tribe needs to have some enumeration within the Census Bureau. You can't even practice some of your spiritual beliefs, like the possession of eagle feathers, which are ceremonial for our people, unless you are part of a recognized tribe. You can't even protect the bones of your ancestors unless you have some status and the government acknowledges that status. Something that may be important for the medical care community is the issue of trauma. Traditional indigenous people that have a heavy tie to their community often will exhibit historical trauma, and it's a multi-generational experience that is specific to an ethnic group, moving from one generation to the next, even though the younger generations may not have personally experienced the worst of that trauma. It tends to continue within the community, the impact of that trauma. It's intergenerational. It goes beyond a particular lifespan, and ancestral trauma winds up moving through the generations. It winds up having a cumulative effect that causes dysfunction within the community. One of the symptoms that we have is an increased percentage of certain diseases like diabetes, that it affects our health care. We also have a high rate of alcoholism and drug addiction and suicide. Some of the recent movements have highlighted how various uh, ethnic groups have suffered from police contact, but what is unknown is that we're actually more likely to be killed by law enforcement than any other group. It's just that the news about what happens to natives, uh, how many of our women have gone missing, uh, how many of our young people have been killed, never seems to hit the news. Never seems to hit the news. We know about it through our internal communications, but rarely do you hear about it on the national news or sometimes even the local news. There is a cycle of trauma of being ignored, having the past pains left unaddressed, and sometimes continuing to resurface because of current treatment from federal laws and actions by the federal government, reducing and negatively impacting tribal rights and concerns. And this cycle of trauma continues from one generation to the next. When you're dealing with a native, you may wind up not understanding some of their reactions or lack of trust, or some of the slight cues that they may give uh, because of the uniqueness of the experience of being an Indigenous person here in the United States. One of the ways to deal with this is to participate in a path of healing, confronting the reality of the historical intergenerational trauma and not sweeping it under the carpet or believing that our people simply need to simply get over it. Many of us aren't continuing to focus on it. I don't view our people as victims. I view us as survivors. The focus is to thrive and to celebrate the culture and to celebrate it in a way that others have an appreciation of it and celebrate it with us. But we don't want to deny the impact of the past and the present realities that continue to affect us. And understanding of how these past things continue to impact us and have been internalized even in the way different tribal people and different tribal nations treat one another. There's sometimes a level of dysfunction and rivalry that has continues actually to be aided and abetted by federal policies that were put in place generations ago and have not sufficiently been altered or changed. Some of this is also being able to listen, to hear the stories that we tell, to understand the sensibilities. One thing that I remember someone talking to me about was the necessity to shave the head of a native person, a native man. And I'm bald by choice, but for many, there's a strong identity with maintaining that the long hair and the braid as part of the cultural tradition. And before I started losing my hair, I had a long braid myself. Uh, for many, that's part of your identity, and to have it shaved is something that is traumatic. Um, so having particular care and understanding that perhaps there needs to be a little more communication, maybe some encouraging the person to talk about it and what they're going to go through, and then showing a little extra comfort in the traumatic impact of having to cut your hair. We tend to understand that it's traumatic for women if they are undergoing cancer treatment or whatnot, but it can be traumatic for Native men. Also, transcending that trauma through some kind of contextualized healing. understanding the background, the cultural sensibilities. And sometimes it's as simple as being aware of the fact that you need to ask questions. How do you feel about this? Is this important to you? So that there's a level of trust that can be built within the caregiver and the patient. For more information on some of these things, I'm going to encourage you to do a screenshot here. These are resources that are available that you may find helpful in continuing to pursue ways to provide culturally sensitive, contextualized care to your Indigenous patients and clients. I hope that this has been helpful to you and informative, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'm not offended by questions. Matter of fact, I prefer that people ask.
Thank you so much, Reverend Norwood. Very appreciative of wonderful information that you provided us that we do need to know as we seek to provide care to all people of our state, and also to educate, and in particular our students, on just being sensitive and culturally humble. And so we open it to questions to our colleagues. Please go ahead.
If I may, Dr. Norwood, thank you so much for that information. Tremendous, tremendous. And what you did for me, sir, is you got me to better understand. One of the things that happens institutionally, many of us in our private lives, we've begun to acknowledge thoughtfully ancestral and indigenous homelands, and that's great. And we recognize who was here and what was here. But what I struggled with a little bit is thinking about how we might be better stewards of Indigenous history and Indigenous present, not just the history, but Indigenous present. And your paths to healing, the confronting, I wrote these down, the understanding, the releasing, the transcending, and most importantly, in almost every aspect of life, of listening. So thank you for that, and I think it's really important that that's a sort of a roadmap that I'd really like to take to heart on behalf of the school and myself.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that was helpful to you. I know that one of the questions I often get that touches on something you mentioned is how I feel about land acknowledgements, and I think that while they can be wonderful teaching tools for people who are unaware, and it may prompt people to do more investigating about the people who inhabited the land, for whom the land was their home, and may continue to be if they continue in that area. The issue, though, is that sometimes it just simply becomes something that is like virtue signaling. We do this to feel good about ourselves. And often it becomes something where they feel it's successful if they leave people feeling guilty. And I have a problem with that. I think a land acknowledgement is wonderful in as much as you're just simply, acknowledging the land you're on is an educational thing. And it becomes meaningful when you're encouraging people and when your institution seeks to have interaction with and celebrate the heritage that we commonly share now. If you're living here, you're a part of that heritage by extension. Um, for me, the goal is never to, make folks feel guilty about something that happened that maybe their ancestors participate in, and maybe they didn't participate in some of the atrocities. Not everybody participated in that, but more of a positive affirmation and bringing the awareness that the communities didn't start when Europeans settled, that there is an extension going back that is a part of who we are as New Jerseyans today.
Reverend Norwood, I'm fascinated. You sort of skipped over it a bit, but could you talk a little bit about the monotheistic spiritual belief systems of the Nulape people before Christianity? Is sort of the front end of educational thing I'd love to learn about. On the back end, a little bit more of a personal question. You obviously are a Christian.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear how you square the circle of obviously Christianity's role in colonization and many of the difficulties that happen, and your current belief. How do you square that circle?
Well, in the first part of your question, dealing with the traditional faith of our people going back, we were always monotheistic. There was always the belief in a single, all-powerful creator. Uh, did not have a specific name. There were references. We referred to him as he who creates us by thought, he who receives our prayers, he who is the giver of life, he who is the great spirit. These were the references that were descriptive of this one entity that was the creator of all things. We also believed in lesser spirits that were given charge by the creator over different areas of life and areas of nature that we did not worship or pray to, but did honor and respect. Uh, there was one that was the guardian of the forest creatures that helped to maintain the balance and the harmony between the needs of the community and maintaining the resources and the balance and the respect for the forest creatures at the same time. So all of that was part of the tradition. And what happened was European settlers, when they came here, they saw us honoring the tree, or praying over the dead animal that we just took, or the tree when we were removing some bark from it, thinking that we were praying to those things when actually we were praying to the creator, honoring the fact that everything belongs to that one great creator. So there was some overlap with other monotheistic traditions. So that was clearly understood. There was also the common understanding of the constant need for ritual purification. And that's why our people smudge. That's why we went to water and bathed constantly. That's why we held sweats. We would typically go into the sweat lodge, sweat, and then go into the river and wash off immediately. There was this constant feeling of the need for spiritual purity. Many of our ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, were about maintaining balances and harmony with nature the way that the Creator intended. In regard to Christianity, what a lot of people don't realize is that my ancestors were Christian for 400 years. And for the initial contact was not one of hostility. There was no force in converting, so much so that some of our early chiefs way back in the 1600s, hearing of the gospel, immediately embraced it. There are accounts from the 1800s, 1700s, and 1800s where conversions were emotional. Where revivalists would come into our areas and whole communities would be overwhelmed by the gospel, that they saw some correspondence with the ancient traditions. Now, not all of the ceremonies and all of the beliefs are able to be held at the same time without contradiction, but many were. So much so that it was because we had Christian churches that our communities were able to continue here in the East. And that's a common story for many of the Eastern communities up and down the East Coast that were communities of first contact, were able to stay because their government went into churches that were controlled by the tribes. The other thing is that, and I mean no offense, but I have to correct you about what Christianity did to my people. Christianity didn't commit the atrocities. People who claim to be Christians committed the atrocities. I love classical music, but if you were to hear me try to bang on a piano and bang out, Ode to Joy, you would stop up your ears because I can't play well at all. So, you wouldn't blame Mozart or Beethoven because I messed up their arrangements. In the same way, I would ask that you not blame the faith, which is pure, by looking at those who mishandled it and misapplied it.
It's Gandhi's famous quote. He says, "Christianity sounds like a great idea. I haven't seen it practiced yet, but it certainly sounds good."
Well, I have seen it practiced well, but I've also seen it practiced poorly, unfortunately.
Which
and I think
I'm trying slowly.
Miriam, you have your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this really terrific presentation. I really appreciate learning more about the tribes from the region. My parents lived and worked on the Cherokee Reservation for a number of years, and my husband and I spent time out in the Southwest on Zuni working there as well. My question, and I really appreciate the point you made about the language and using Indian uh, for, the point of when documents and, language in legal documents gets changed. I've always wondered about the use of that word because when we were on the reservation, we heard people self-referring as Indian, as well as obviously Indian Health Service. I'm less surprised that the government might still be using that. My question is, what's your personal preference for what language? I really loved the point you made of like call them by the tribe, and that makes great sense to me. You can't always do that because you might not know or whatnot. So I'm just curious what your kind of personal guidance and preferences are in terms of language.
You're always safe to say native or indigenous. That's considered to be safe. Something that is quite prominent in Canada that is becoming practice here is First Nations. That's another reference that is quite common. I tend not to become offended, and most of the people that I deal with that have been involved at the national level dealing with politics and the interface between the federal government and the tribal nations don't have a problem with being called American Indian for the same reasons that I indicated. I'm actually more sensitive about it because of our Indian American brothers and sisters. It was a misnomer to call us Indian, and I certainly don't. I have dear friends that are Indian Americans and also Indians from India that kind of their eyebrows go up when the reference is made. So I'm more concerned about the offense to them, but there's an understanding of the history that we have here. 500 years of contact here, just in this region and colonization and documents and treaties that it stuck, and I'm not offended by it personally. But if you say indigenous, native, First Nations, or the tribe, you're probably safe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, Dr. Norwood. Obviously, a critical aspect of this conversation is that we are still here. That's actually the publication that you did, and our understanding of the presence and the opportunities that come with that. We are a school that was established around like community, and like the core aspect of it is like education in community. So doing that so students really grow their profession through those interactions. What is your insight on opportunities for connecting young learners with our Lenape community here, educationally and in terms of?
I think outreach is very important. Um, the communities that remain have a history of being self-isolating for many generations out of necessity. And because of that, even though the younger generations are far more integrated into the culture than, let's say, my parents and grandparents were, the wider culture in New Jersey. I think that reaching out specifically and making the younger generation aware of opportunities within healthcare. Quite a few of our folks in our tribe have pursued careers in healthcare, but some of that is because of interactions where the institution has come to tribal events and shared information, where scholarships are available, financial aid is available, where if you're reaching out to simply educate about health in general, there can be a relationship built with some of the local tribal communities. You're up in the area where the Sandhill people are and the Ramapo people are. So reaching out to those tribes and finding out what you can do. The state also has a Commission on American Indian Affairs, and where there are representatives from each of the tribes that sit on that commission, making a present. If you're having something special going on at the school and you want to involve the tribes, or at least to make them aware so they can spread information out to their communities, that's a wonderful way to be able to do that.
Thank you so much. That is very valuable information. Any last question? One more question, and I think we'll close this wonderful presentation this morning. Well, that's it. Thank you so much. We appreciate your presence, and we'll be in touch definitely for future conversations and your insights.
I thank you and Wanishi for inviting me. I enjoyed being able to present to your team.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Norwood.
Thank you. Thank you.